The moment my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're too poor to retire. You'll just be a burden on us," I knew exactly what kind of person she really was. I'm Malcolm Turner, 70 years old now, telling you this story from my living room in Asheville, North Carolina. But 2 years ago, I was 68, sitting at my son Craig's dining table in suburban Columbus, Ohio, wearing my usual thrift store cardigan, and wondering how my life had come to this moment. I spent 42 years carrying mail through every neighborhood in Columbus, rain or shine, heat or snow. Started in 1978 at age 23, retired at 65. I'm the kind of man who wears cardigan sweaters from Goodwill and drove a 12-year-old Camry with a dent in the passenger door I never bothered fixing. That Sunday evening, I sat at Craig's dining table, the same table I'd sat at dozens of times before. The pot roast was good. His wife Sloan had made it, and I'll give her credit. She could cook. We were halfway through dinner when the conversation turned to retirement planning. Craig mentioned a coworker who'd just retired early, bought an RV, planned to see the country. Sloan set down her fork, looked at Craig, then at me. Her expression shifted into something I'd seen before, but never quite this naked. Pity mixed with irritation, mixed with superiority. "Well, that's nice for people who planned ahead," she said. Her voice had that particular edge people use when they want to cut, without raising volume. Not everyone has that luxury. She let those words sit there a moment. Then she turned fully toward me. "Malcolm, have you even thought about what happens when you can't work anymore? Because Craig and I have been talking, and honestly, we're worried you're too poor to retire. You'll just end up being a burden on us." The words hung in the air like poison. Craig's face went red. Sloan, "Jesus, what? Someone needs to say it. Your father's 68 and still pinching pennies. He clips coupons. He shops at thrift stores. We need to be realistic about what that means for our future." I took another bite of pot roast, chewed slowly, swallowed, took a sip of water from the glass in front of me. My face didn't change. 42 years of dealing with angry dogs and angrier customers had taught me how to keep a mask in place when I needed to. But inside, something clicked into position, like a lock tumbler finding its groove. "The roast is excellent, Sloan," I said. My voice was even, calm. "Thank you for having me. If you've ever been disrespected by someone half your age, someone who thinks they've got you figured out based on the clothes you wear and the car you drive, go ahead and hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to know who's out there listening to an old mailman's story." Craig tried to change the subject, started talking about his work, something about a project deadline. Sloan smiled, satisfied she'd made her point. She probably thought I'd go home and worry, probably thought I'd lie awake wondering how I'd manage my old age, how I'd avoid becoming the burden she'd already decided I was. She had no idea what she'd just done, no idea at all. What happened next didn't start that night. It started 45 years earlier, with a library book and a decision that would change everything. What Sloan didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the poor old mailman sitting at that table had a net worth that would make most people's jaws drop. Let me take you back. 1978. I was 23 years old, fresh out of a community college business course I'd taken at night while working construction during the day. The Postal Service was hiring. Good benefits, steady work, pension. My father told me it was a smart choice, the kind of job you could retire from with dignity. I took the exam, scored well, started my route that fall. The work was exactly what I expected. Predictable, physical, repetitive. I didn't mind. I've never been the type who needs excitement. I've always valued stability over flash. But something happened in my first year that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I found a book at the Columbus Metropolitan Library, The Richest Man in Babylon, by George S. Clayson. I'd gone in looking for a car repair manual and walked past the personal finance section. The title caught my eye. I checked it out. That book taught me about paying yourself first, about making your money work for you, about the difference between appearing wealthy and being wealthy. It explained, in simple parables I could understand, that a portion of every dollar earned should go toward building wealth. So I did it. Started that same month. $50 from every paycheck went into investments. Every single paycheck. No exceptions. In 1987, the market crashed. I kept investing. In 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, I kept investing. In 2008, when the economy collapsed and my coworkers were panicking about their 401ks, I kept investing. Actually increased my contribution to $400 a month because stocks were on sale. I drove used cars. Always have. Bought my house in 1983 for $42,000. Paid it off in 15 years by making extra principal payments whenever I could. Learned to fix most things myself. Plumbing, electrical, carpentry. My late wife Eleanor understood. She worked as a school secretary, lived the same way I did. We never felt deprived. We had what mattered. My coworkers thought I was cheap, called me Coupon Malcolm behind my back, sometimes to my face, joking. They drove new trucks, took cruises, bought boats. They looked at me with something close to pity when I'd pull out my lunch from home. Same turkey sandwich I'd been eating for 40 years. Let them think what they wanted. I knew what I was building. Eleanor passed in 2019. Cancer. 5 years before these events I'm telling you about. She never got to see full retirement with me, but she died knowing we'd done it right, knowing we'd never been a burden to anyone. That mattered to her, matters to me. By the time Sloan made her comment at that dinner table, my portfolio had grown to something most people spend their whole lives dreaming about. The mailman in the thrift store cardigan had built an empire one paycheck at a time, invisible to everyone around him, and I'd kept it that way on purpose, because I'd learned something about human nature over 68 years. People reveal who they really are when they think you have nothing they want. Sloan had just revealed everything. For 3 years, I watched this woman systematically try to erase me from my own son's life, all because she thought I was too broke to matter. It started small, easy to dismiss as accidents or oversights. The first Thanksgiving after they got married, I didn't get an invitation. Craig called me the day before, apologetic, saying Sloan must have forgotten to mention it. Said of course I should come, but I'd already accepted an invitation from my neighbor Helen. I told Craig not to worry about it. Christmas that year, I showed up with a gift for both of them. A nice set of kitchen knives I'd found on clearance at Macy's. Good quality, half price. Sloan opened it, looked at the price sticker I'd forgotten to remove, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Malcolm, you shouldn't have. No, really, you shouldn't have." She laughed. Everyone laughed. Like it was charming. Craig looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The comments about my clothes came next. "Malcolm, is that the same sweater you wore last month?" At a family barbecue. "Craig, we should take your dad shopping. He clearly doesn't know how to dress himself anymore." Always delivered with a smile. Always with just enough plausibility that calling it out would make me look sensitive. At Easter dinner with her parents, she told them I had a poverty mindset from growing up poor. I didn't grow up poor. My father was a union electrician. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. But Sloan needed me to fit a narrative, so she invented one. Then came the mortgage comments. She'd convinced Craig I was struggling to keep my house, told him I needed to think about downsizing before it's too late. Craig actually asked me about it one day, gentle and concerned, if I was having trouble with payments. I told him the house had been paid off since 1998. He looked confused, said Sloan had told him I was worried about making ends meet. That's when I realized this wasn't casual cruelty. This was strategic. She'd order wine at restaurants, then make a show of noticing I ordered water. "Malcolm's watching his budget," she'd say to the server, voice dripping with sympathy. She'd invite me to join them at upscale places, then suggest loudly we go somewhere more affordable for everyone. Translation: more affordable for the poor old man. The worst part wasn't the disrespect. I've handled worse. The worst part was watching my son, my boy, who I'd raised to stand up for what's right, slowly absorb her version of reality, watching him start to see me through her eyes, watching him become protective of her feelings when I was around, like I might embarrass him somehow. 3 years of this. 3 years of watching her poison my relationship with Craig, one small cut at a time. 3 years of staying quiet, because I kept thinking maybe it would get better. Maybe she'd mature. Maybe Craig would see through it. But people like Sloane don't mature. They escalate. And I kept coming to these dinners, kept accepting these invitations, because I wanted to know exactly who she was. I wanted to see how far she'd go. Turns out pretty far. When she asked me to mortgage my house so she could play venture capitalist, I realized it was time to stop being invisible. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the burden comment. My phone rang. Sloane's name on the screen. That alone was unusual. She never called me directly. Everything went through Craig. I answered. "Hello, Sloane." Her voice was different, warmer, almost sweet. "Malcolm, hi. How are you? I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "I'm fine. What can I do for you?" She laughed, light and musical. "Can't a daughter-in-law just call to check in?" I waited. Silence is a powerful tool. Most people rush to fill it. She filled it. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity. Craig and I are looking at an investment. His friend Brandon is launching a tech startup, something with apps and social media analytics. It's a ground floor opportunity, Malcolm. The kind of thing that could set us up for life. How much does this opportunity cost? $50,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but Brandon says investors are seeing returns of 500–600% in the first year alone. We'd be crazy not to jump on this." I asked the obvious question. "What does Craig say about it?" Her voice tightened slightly. "Craig's on board. We just need to secure the capital. We thought maybe you could help. A second mortgage on your house, or maybe withdrawing from retirement funds. It's not like you need much to live on, right? And honestly, Malcolm, it's kind of the least you could do since Craig will be supporting you soon anyway." There it was. The assumption laid bare. In her mind, I was already dependent on them, already obligated, already owned. "I'd need to see a business plan," I said. "Financial projections, Brandon's background and track record." She became evasive. "It's more of a relationship investment. Brandon's brilliant, Malcolm. This is about trust." "I don't invest $50,000 on trust, Sloane." Her warmth evaporated. "Fine. You know what? You're going to be living with us eventually. This is practically investing in your own future. But if you want to be stubborn about it, that's your choice." "I'll think about it," I said. "You do that." She hung up. I sat there in my paid-off house, in my worn recliner, looking at the phone in my hand. The audacity was almost impressive. She'd actually convinced herself she had a right to my money, that my resources, whatever she imagined them to be, belonged to her somehow. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. "Thomas Peterson," I said when he answered. "It's Malcolm Turner. We need to meet. There's something I need your help with." It was time to show my hand. When Peterson turned those monitors toward me, showing $2,347,691.18, I didn't feel pride. I felt vindication for every coupon I'd clipped and every dinner invite I'd declined. Thomas Peterson's office sits on the 14th floor of a building downtown, glass windows overlooking the Scioto River. I'd been coming here for 30 years, since Peterson was a junior associate, and I was a 38-year-old mailman with a growing portfolio and questions about tax efficiency. Now he was silver-haired, a partner in the firm. I was 68, with a decision to make. "Malcolm," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Good to see you. What's on your mind?" I sat down, took off my jacket. Same cardigan I'd worn to Craig's dinner. "My daughter-in-law asked me for $50,000. She wants me to take out a second mortgage or withdraw from retirement funds to invest in her friend's tech startup." Peterson's eyebrows went up. He'd met Sloane twice at office Christmas parties years ago. He'd formed an opinion. Never said it directly, but I could read between lines. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it. Then I thought I'd come see you first." He nodded slowly, turned to his computer. "Let me pull up your current positions." The dual monitors came alive with numbers, charts. colored graphs showing allocations across different sectors. He rotated them toward me. There it was. Total portfolio value, $2,347,691.18. I'd seen the number before, checked it quarterly, watched it grow, but seeing it displayed like this, official and undeniable, hit different. Peterson walked me through it, pointing at sections. Vanguard Total Stock Market Index, 847,000. Vanguard Total International, 412,000. Municipal Bonds, 298,000. Dividend Aristocrats Portfolio, 556,000. Money Market for Liquidity, 45,000. And your rental property, assessed at 190,000, generating 1,400 monthly after expenses. He pulled up another screen. Your investment timeline started in 1978 with $50 monthly contributions. By 1990, you'd increased to $200 monthly. By 2000, $400. Your average annual contribution over 45 years was approximately $4,300. Total contributions, $193,500. Current value, $2.3 million. That's the power of compound interest and never panicking. I remembered every market downturn. The sick feeling in 1987 when my coworker Danny cashed out his entire 401k, convinced the market would never recover. The dot-com crash in 2000, when people lost fortunes in tech stocks while my boring index funds just kept plugging along. The 2008 financial crisis, when my portfolio dropped 40% in 6 months and I kept buying shares every 2 weeks like clockwork. Your withdrawal rate, Peterson continued, using the 4% rule. You could take $92,000 annually without ever touching principal. Your postal pension is what? $38,000? $39,000, with cost of living adjustments. So you're living on the pension, letting this compound further. Malcolm, you've executed one of the most disciplined investment strategies I've ever seen. You understand that, right? I understood. What I didn't understand was how to explain to my son that his wife saw me as a burden when I could write a check for $50,000 without even noticing it was gone. What are your intentions? Peterson asked. Regarding the loan request, I looked at those numbers for another moment, thought about Sloane's voice on the phone, that artificial sweetness masking contempt. I think it's time certain people learned who I actually am. Peterson leaned back in his chair, the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. What do you need from me? While everyone was buying new cars and big houses, I was buying shares of American businesses at 50 cents on the dollar during crashes, and nobody even noticed. The education started with that library book in 1978, but the real learning came from doing. From making that first $50 investment and feeling like I was throwing money into a void. From checking the account balance 3 months later and seeing it had grown to $53. $53. $3 in gains. It felt like nothing and everything at the same time. By the end of that first year, my $600 in contributions had become $643. By year 2, $1,284 total value on $1,200 invested. The money was making money. Compound interest wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, happening in my account, month after month. The first real test came in October 1987, Black Monday. The market dropped 22% in a single day. My coworkers gathered around the break room, newspapers spread out, talking about retirement accounts disappearing. Danny pulled everything out, converted to cash. I'll get back in when things stabilize, he said. I bought more. Stocks were on sale. Nobody understood that. The 2000 dot-com bubble was easier to avoid than people think. I never bought individual tech stocks, never chased the hot IPOs everyone was talking about, stuck with broad market index funds. When the bubble burst, my portfolio dipped, but didn't crater. I kept contributing. 2008 was harder. Watching your account balance drop 40% in 6 months tests everything you think you know about long-term investing. My portfolio went from $820,000 to $492,000. I was 56 years old, 9 years from retirement. That was terrifying. But I'd learned by then. that market crashes are where wealth gets built if you have the stomach for it. I increased my contribution to $600 a month, bought shares at prices I hadn't seen in a decade. By 2013, I'd recovered everything and gained another 40%. By 2020, despite the COVID crash, I'd crossed 2 million. The rental property was a different kind of investment. 1995, a small 2-bedroom house 3 blocks from mine went into foreclosure. Bank wanted $48,000. I'd saved $20,000 in cash, took a small mortgage for the rest, paid it off in 4 years, rented it out ever since. Same tenant for 12 years now, a nurse at Riverside Hospital. She takes care of the place like it's her own. That property throws off $1,400 a month after taxes, insurance, and a maintenance fund. Over 28 years, it's generated nearly $340,000 in rent, while appreciating to $190,000 in value. Simple math, not magic, not luck, just buying assets when I had income, holding them when others panicked, living on less than I earned, letting time do what time does with money that's working. And through all of it, people saw the thrift store clothes and the old car and the clipped coupons, and they assumed they understood my situation. They assumed wrong. Eleanor used to say, "Don't get mad, get strategic." And I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about reality. I drove home from Peterson's office, hands steady on the wheel, mind running through options like I used to sort mail, methodically, one piece at a time. Option 1, simply refuse the loan. Tell Sloan no, offer no explanation. That would solve the immediate problem but change nothing else. She'd still see me as poor. Craig would still see me through her lens. The disrespect would continue, maybe grow worse because I'd disappointed their expectations. Option 2, reveal everything immediately. Show up at their house with bank statements. Make a dramatic announcement. That felt wrong. Too confrontational. Too much like proving something to people whose opinions shouldn't matter. But they did matter, because one of those people was my son. Option 3, strategic disclosure. Give Sloan exactly what she asked for. Information about my finances, but on my terms, in my timing, with my framing. That felt right. Eleanor and I had 38 years together before the cancer took her. She'd been a school secretary, sensible and pragmatic, the kind of woman who could see through people's performances to what they actually were. She'd met Sloan exactly once, at Craig's wedding, came home and said, "That one's only interested in what serves her. Watch yourself, Malcolm." I'd watched. For 3 years, I'd watched. Eleanor used to tell me about a teacher at her school who complained constantly about students, parents, administration, drama every day. One day, Eleanor asked her, "Why do you still work here if it's so terrible?" The teacher looked at her like she was stupid. "Because I need the paycheck," Eleanor said. "Then you've made your choice. You can't complain about a situation you're choosing to stay in." I'd been choosing to stay in this situation, choosing to accept the disrespect because I wanted to maintain peace, because I wanted Craig in my life, because confrontation felt harder than endurance. But there's a difference between patience and doormat, between tolerance and self-abandonment. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house, paid off in 1998, worth $210,000 now, more if the market stayed hot. Mine, nobody's burden, nobody's charity case. I went inside, picked up my phone, called Peterson back. "Thomas, I need something from you. A comprehensive portfolio statement, not on a screen, printed on good paper, in one of those leather presentation folders you use for high net worth clients, and a letter on firm letterhead detailing my net worth, investment history, and annual income potential. When do you need it?" "By Friday." "Consider it done." Next call. My estate attorney, Margaret Hartley, made an appointment for Thursday morning. Time to update my will. Time to make sure my legacy reflected my values, not other people's assumptions about what I could afford. Time to show my hand, but carefully, strategically, the way Eleanor would have wanted. The hardest part wasn't Sloan's greed. It was watching my own son forget who raised him. Craig's a good man. I need to say that clearly, because what comes next might sound like I'm condemning him. I'm not. He's a dedicated high school history teacher, works extra hours tutoring students who can't afford help, coaches JV basketball even though it pays almost nothing. He's kind. He's earnest. He cares about making the world better, but he's completely blind to what his wife is doing. I remember him at 8 years old, coming to the post office on Take Your Child to Work Day. He sat at the sorting table, so proud to help his dad organize mail by route number. Told his third-grade class I had the most important job in Columbus because I brought people their letters from family and their birthday cards from grandmas. How does that boy become this man? This 42-year-old who sees his father through his wife's contemptuous eyes? I've thought about it, traced the pattern back. It started gradually. The first year they were married, holidays alternated between my house and Sloane's parents in Cincinnati. By year 2, somehow it was always Cincinnati. Geographic distance became emotional distance. Sloane monopolized the calendar, the conversations, the narrative about what Malcolm was or wasn't. She'd reframe things in front of Craig. I'd mention fixing my own plumbing. She'd say, "Your dad can't afford a plumber. Isn't that sad?" I'd bring a dish to pass at their cookout. She'd tell Craig later, "Your father's so cheap he won't even buy a bottle of wine." My frugality, the discipline that built wealth, became embarrassing poverty in her retelling, and Craig absorbed it, started looking at me with pity, started suggesting gently that maybe I should think about getting some help with finances, started treating me like I was fragile, failing, fading. That hurt worse than any insult Sloane could throw. But I made a decision sitting there in my living room, looking at the photos of Craig growing up on the mantel. Whatever happened with Sloane, whatever revelation came, I'd leave the door open for my son. I wouldn't force him to choose, wouldn't issue ultimatums, but I also wouldn't sacrifice my dignity or my financial security waiting for him to wake up. Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even with your own child, especially with your own child. I wanted everything documented, professional, and undeniable, because I wasn't just answering a loan request. I was ending a 3-year lie. Thursday morning, I met with Margaret Hartley at her office on Broad Street. We'd worked together since 2018, when Eleanor's cancer diagnosis forced us to think about end-of-life planning. Margaret had drafted Eleanor's will, helped us navigate the estate issues, been a steady professional presence through the worst time of my life. "Malcolm," she greeted me, genuine warmth in her voice. "It's been a while. How are you holding up?" "I'm all right, but I need to talk about updating my will." Her expression shifted to professional attention. "Of course. What are you thinking?" I gave her the broad strokes, the situation with Sloane, the realization that my estate planning needed to reflect my actual values, not assumed family obligations. "Let me think about the specifics," I said. "But I wanted you to know I'll be making substantial changes. I'll call you next week to schedule a proper meeting. I'll be ready whenever you are." Friday afternoon, Peterson's assistant called. "Mr. Turner, your documents are ready." I drove downtown, took the elevator to 14. Peterson handed me a burgundy leather portfolio, the kind with brass corners that weighs more than it should. Inside, crisp pages on heavy stock paper. First page, Peterson Financial Group letterhead, my name, account summary. Second page, detailed breakdown of holdings. Third page, a letter from Peterson himself on firm stationery, outlining my investment timeline and current financial position. "Professional enough?" Peterson asked. "Perfect." That evening, Sloane texted me. First time she'd initiated direct contact since the phone call. "Have you thought about that loan? We need to move quickly. Brandon says the investment round closes next Friday." I looked at that message for a long moment. The presumption, the pressure, the complete lack of awareness that she was about to walk into something she couldn't manipulate her way out of. I typed back, "Come by Saturday at 2 p.m. We'll discuss your request properly." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, a thumbs up emoji. That was it. A thumbs up. Like I'd agreed to pick up milk at the store. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Saturday morning I woke at 6, same as always. Made coffee in the same Mr. Coffee machine I'd owned for 15 years. Sat in my recliner watching the sun come up through the living room window. The house was quiet, clean, mine. I thought about what was coming, rehearsed it in my mind. Not the words exactly, but the tone. Calm, factual, unemotional. This wasn't about humiliating Sloane. It was about establishing reality, about making clear that I wasn't who she'd decided I was, and I wouldn't be treated as if I were. The leather portfolio sat on the side table, burgundy against the worn fabric of the chair arm. Everything inside it was true. Everything inside it was earned. 45 years of discipline, of choosing the boring, responsible path while everyone around me chose flash and debt and keeping up with the Joneses. And now it was going to speak for itself. At 1:45, I made fresh coffee, put out 2 cups. Sloane wouldn't drink it. She'd made comments before about my grocery store brand, but hospitality mattered, even now, especially now. At 1:58, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I picked up the portfolio, held it in my lap, waited. The doorbell rang. I stood up, walked to the door, opened it. "Hello, Sloane," I said. "Come in." She sat in my living room, in the house I paid off in 1998, and told me this investment was my chance to finally contribute something meaningful. I almost laughed. Sloane stepped inside wearing what she probably thought was casual, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, boots that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She glanced around my living room the way you'd glance at a museum exhibit on poverty, the 40-year-old sofa, the tube TV I'd never bothered replacing because I barely watched it, the walls that hadn't been repainted since Eleanor picked the color in 2003. Her nose wrinkled slightly, just enough to notice. "Where's Craig?" I asked, though I already knew. "Teacher conference, budget planning for next semester. You know how dedicated he is." She sat on the sofa, set her purse down, pulled out her phone. "This won't take long. I know you're probably busy." I wasn't busy. I was retired, but I let it pass. She launched without preamble. "So, Brandon's startup, it's called Synapse AI. They're developing algorithms for social media content optimization using machine learning. Basically, businesses upload their content, and the AI tells them exactly when to post, what hashtags to use, predicted engagement rates, all of it." She showed me her phone screen, some glossy presentation with charts and graphs and buzzwords. They're projecting revenue of $5 million in year 1, $50 million by year 3. Early investors are getting in at a $2 million valuation. Brandon says that's going to 10x within 2 years, minimum. I nodded, said nothing. The investment minimum is $50,000. I know that sounds like a lot, Malcolm, but think about the return potential. You put in 50, you get back 500,000. That's life-changing money. She leaned forward, voice dropping into what she probably thought was confidential intimacy. "Here's what I'm thinking. You take a home equity line of credit. Banks are practically giving money away to seniors right now, especially with property values up. You're sitting on equity you're not using. Borrow the 50, invest it, and when the returns come in, which Brandon guarantees will be within 18 months, you pay off the loan and keep the profit." She slid a glossy prospectus across my coffee table. Synapse AI in bold letters. Stock photos of diverse millennials looking at laptops thoughtfully. "And honestly, Malcolm, this is perfect timing for you. You're at an age where you need to be thinking about legacy, about what you're leaving behind. Craig and I are your family. We're your future. This investment doesn't just help us, it helps you. It means you're part of something bigger than just this." She gestured vaguely at my living room, at my life. "Plus," she continued, "when you're older, when you need care, Craig and I will be in a better financial position to help. We'll be able to afford a nice facility, quality caregivers. That's worth something, right? Peace of mind?" She sat back, satisfied with her pitch, waiting for my response. "This is your chance to finally contribute something meaningful to this family's future," she said. "To be part of our success story." The leather portfolio sat beside my chair, just out of her sight line. I reached for it slowly, deliberately. "Before I consider your proposal," I said, I think you should understand my actual financial situation. The exact moment she saw that number, 2.3 million, her entire face changed, and I watched 3 years of disrespect evaporate into greedy calculation. I opened the portfolio, removed the first document, placed it on the coffee table in front of Sloan, rotating it so she could read it right side up. Peterson Financial Group, letterhead at the top, gold embossed, professional, undeniable. Her eyes dropped to the page, started scanning. I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. Account summary, Malcolm Turner, total portfolio value, $2,347,691.18. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked up at me, back down at the paper, up at me again. What is this? My investment portfolio. My voice was level, calm, like I was explaining a mail route. Let me walk you through it. I pulled out the second page. Detailed breakdown. I started investing in 1978, 45 years ago. My first contribution was $50 from my postal service paycheck. I continued contributing every 2 weeks, increasing the amount as my salary increased. By the time I retired 3 years ago, I was investing 30% of my gross income. I pointed to the allocation chart. Broad market index funds, low fees, diversified across domestic and international markets, municipal bonds for stability, dividend aristocrats, companies that have increased their dividends for 25 consecutive years. Nothing exciting, nothing risky, just consistent, boring investing. Sloan was staring at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. The Postal Service pension covers my living expenses, $39,000 annually, adjusted for inflation. I live on that. The investments compound untouched. They've been growing for 4.5 decades. I pulled out the third page. This is a letter from Thomas Peterson, my financial advisor of 30 years, explaining my investment timeline and current position. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for the letter. Read it. Her lips moved, silently forming the numbers. I also own a rental property, I continued. Purchased in 1995 for $48,000. Current value approximately $190,000. Generates $1,400 monthly in net rental income after all expenses. I reached over, gently took back the Synapse AI prospectus she'd given me. I appreciate the opportunity, Sloan, but I don't invest in startups. Too risky, too speculative. I prefer boring index funds that turned my mail carrier salary into generational wealth by following simple principles. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference. Never panic sell. Let compound interest work. I set the prospectus aside, folded my hands in my lap. You asked about a home equity line of credit. My house has been paid off since 1998. No mortgage, no debt of any kind. Haven't carried a balance on a credit card in 45 years. The silence in the room was profound. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking from the next room, hear a car driving past outside, hear Sloane's breathing, shallow and quick. Using the standard 4% withdrawal rule, I said, I could take $92,000 annually from my investments without touching the principal. I don't need to do that. But theoretically, if I did need income beyond my pension, it's available. I looked at her directly. So when you suggested I take a second mortgage or withdraw from retirement funds to invest in your friend's startup, you were operating under some significant misconceptions about my situation. Her face had gone from white to red. Her eyes were still fixed on those numbers. $2,347,691.18. Within 5 minutes of seeing my bank statement, I went from burden to beloved father, and that told me everything I needed to know. The transformation happened so fast, it would have been impressive if it wasn't so disgusting. Sloane's shock lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then something clicked behind her eyes. The calculation was visible, the reframing, the recalibration of how she needed to play this. Her whole body language changed. She sat forward, her expression softening from stunned to something she probably thought looked warm, concerned, familial. Malcolm. She reached across the coffee table, put her hand on mine. Her voice went gentle, intimate. I had no idea. Craig never told me any of this. I didn't pull my hand away, just looked at her. Why didn't you say something? She continued. All this time, we've been worried about you, and you've been sitting on this kind of security? We could have been celebrating this together. We're family. She sat back, laughing lightly, shaking her head like this was all a funny misunderstanding. God, I feel terrible. Some of the things I've said, I was just concerned, worried about your future. But obviously you've got everything handled. More than handled. This is incredible, Malcolm. Really. She picked up the portfolio statement again, scanning it with new eyes. I mean, to build this kind of wealth on a postal salary? That's remarkable. That's genuinely impressive. The prospectus sat forgotten on the table. Obviously, you shouldn't invest in something like Synapse AI. You're absolutely right. Too risky for someone at your stage of life. I don't know what I was thinking. Craig and I can find another way. Then came the pivot. You know what we should do? Sunday dinner. My pot roast. That's your favorite, right? We should celebrate this properly. As a family. She pulled out her phone, already scrolling. Actually, Craig's birthday is next month. We should do something special. Have you over? Maybe invite some of his teacher friends. You could share your investment story. People would be fascinated. Over the next week, my phone rang more than it had in the previous 3 years combined. Monday, Sloan calling to confirm Sunday dinner. Tuesday, a text about Thanksgiving plans, asking if I had any special dietary needs we should accommodate. Wednesday, another call, this one about a family financial planning session, where I could share my wisdom and experience with her and Craig. Thursday, she showed up at my house unannounced with a casserole. Just wanted to make sure you're eating well, she said, all smiles and concern. Every interaction, every call, every suddenly remembered invitation confirmed what I'd already known, but needed to see proven beyond doubt. She'd never cared about me as a person, never cared about Malcolm the father, the man who raised the son she married. She only cared about utility, about access, about what I could do for her. And now that the utility had increased exponentially, so had her interest. It was pathetic and telling, and exactly what I needed to know. When Margaret asked if I was sure about leaving my son just $10,000, I said, I'm not punishing him. I'm refusing to fund her. I met with Margaret Hartley in her downtown Columbus office the following week. Her office was smaller than Peterson's, more personal. Photos of her grandchildren on the desk. Shelves lined with law books that looked actually used, not decorative. She'd helped Eleanor and me through the hardest time of our lives. When the cancer diagnosis came in 2018, Margaret had been patient, compassionate, thorough. She'd made sure Eleanor's wishes were documented clearly, made sure I understood every detail of what would happen after she was gone. Now, I sat across from her again, 3 years after Eleanor's death, with different, but equally serious business. I need to make substantial changes to my will, I said, and I want to explain my reasoning so it's documented. Margaret pulled up my file, picked up her pen. I'm listening. I explained everything. The 3 years of disrespect, the burden comment, the loan request, the revelation, Sloane's instant transformation from contempt to calculated sweetness. Margaret listened without interruption. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. What do you want your estate to accomplish, Malcolm? That was exactly the right question. Not who did I want to punish, but what did I want to create? What legacy did I want 45 years of discipline to leave behind? St. Jude's Children's Hospital, I said. $900,000. My nephew died of leukemia when he was 7. That was 1979. The treatment options now versus then. It's a different world. I want to help make that world possible for other families. Margaret typed, nodded. Columbus Literacy Council, $600,000. Eleanor spent 38 years teaching adults to read at the library's night program. She'd want that work to continue. More typing. Ohio State Postal Workers Scholarship Fund, $500,000. For children whose parents work for USPS, help them get education their families might not be able to afford otherwise. My job gave me everything. I'd like it to keep giving. That's $2 million, Margaret said. What about the rental property? Habitat for Humanity, the house itself. Let them sell it or use it however helps the most families. And Craig? I took a breath. This was the hard part. Saying it out loud to someone who'd known Craig since he was younger, who'd seen us together at Eleanor's funeral. $10,000. And a letter. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw her register it. The disparity, the implications. The letter will explain my reasoning. I'll update it annually as long as I'm able. I want Craig to know I love him, that this isn't about punishing him for his choices. But I won't fund Sloane's manipulation. My money represents 45 years of discipline, Margaret. Every single dollar. I won't let it reward 3 years of disrespect. Nothing for Sloane directly. Nothing. She's not family in any way that matters. Margaret looked at me for a long moment. Are you certain? These decisions are difficult to contest legally, but they do sometimes create family conflict that extends. I'm certain. She nodded. I'll have documents prepared within 2 weeks. We'll need 2 witnesses for signing. And Malcolm, she paused. For what it's worth, I think Eleanor would understand this decision. That meant more than Margaret probably knew. I sat at that Thanksgiving table surrounded by vultures in holiday sweaters, all suddenly fascinated by the poor old mailman they'd ignored for 3 years. The invitation had come 3 weeks before the holiday. Sloane's voice on the phone, warm and insistent. Malcolm, you absolutely have to come to Thanksgiving this year. My parents will be here, my sister Vanessa. It'll be a real family gathering. We've been so disconnected lately. Let's change that. First Thanksgiving invitation in 3 years. I accepted, partly because I was curious how far this performance would go, partly because I wanted to see Craig in a family setting, see if there was any awareness behind his eyes. I showed up with a bottle of wine, $12 from Kroger, screw-top cap, my usual. Sloane answered the door in a designer dress and apron combination that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Malcolm, you made it, and you brought wine. How thoughtful. She actually hugged me, something she'd never done before. The house smelled like turkey and sweet potatoes. Sloane's parents were already there, Tom and Linda, mid-60s, well-dressed, the kind of people who vacation in Hilton Head and talk about their investment properties. They'd met me exactly twice before, both times barely acknowledging my existence. Now Tom stood up immediately, hand extended. Malcolm, good to see you. Sloane's been telling us about your impressive investment portfolio. Really remarkable what you've built. There it was. She'd told them. Discussed my private financial information with her entire family. Linda chimed in from the sofa. It's so wonderful to have financial security in retirement. Tom and I worry about it constantly, even with our planning. You must sleep so well at night. Sloane's sister, Vanessa, arrived with her husband. Within 10 minutes, she was asking about my rental properties. Plural. Sloane had apparently upgraded my one modest 2-bedroom to a real estate empire. Craig seemed genuinely pleased. He kept smiling, looking around at everyone talking, probably thinking this was what healing looked like, what reconciliation felt like. He had no idea. Dinner was elaborate. Turkey, ham, 7 side dishes, 3 pies. I sat between Tom and Vanessa. Tom talked about municipal bonds versus corporate bonds. Vanessa mentioned she and her husband were exploring real estate investment trusts. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, investments, financial strategy. The old mailman was suddenly the most interesting person at the table. During pie, Sloane stood to make a toast. I'm so grateful we're all together. Family is everything. And Malcolm, she looked at me with what I'm sure she thought was affection. We're so glad you're here. You're such an important part of our lives. Craig raised his glass, beaming. After dessert, I helped clear dishes. Sloane cornered me in the kitchen, voice dropping to that confidential tone. Malcolm, Craig and I have been talking. We're thinking about buying a bigger house. Something with a real yard. Maybe a home office for Craig. The market's competitive. Down payments are steep. She touched my arm. We wondered if you might want to help. As a family investment, you'd technically own part of the property, build equity. I looked at her hand on my arm, at her expectant face, at the kitchen doorway where Craig was laughing with her father about something. I'll think about it, I said. Same thing I always said, but this time, I already knew the answer. When my own son defended her gold digging as making amends, I knew I'd already lost him, at least for now. The following Tuesday, I called Craig. Want to grab lunch? Just you and me. Tommy's Diner, like old times. Tommy's had been our place when Craig was growing up. Saturday mornings before Little League, celebration dinners after report cards, that last breakfast before he left for college, red vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1987. Craig met me there at noon, slid into the booth across from me, smiled. Man, I haven't been here in forever. Remember when I ate 4 pancakes and threw up in the parking lot? You were 12. I told you 3 was your limit. We ordered BLTs for both of us. Coffee. When the waitress left, I got to the point. Craig, I need to talk to you about Sloan. His smile faded. Dad, just listen. I've noticed something. Before she knew about my financial situation, I barely heard from either of you. No holiday invitations, minimal contact. Now suddenly, I'm at Thanksgiving getting weekly calls, being asked to invest in houses. Craig's jaw tightened. She's trying to make amends. Why can't you appreciate that? Is she? Or is she trying to make deposits in a bank she just discovered exists? That's not fair. Did you know she asked me to help with a down payment? He looked away. She mentioned it. I don't see the problem. Parents help with houses all the time. But I wasn't asked before, Craig. When she thought I was poor. When she told you I'd be a burden on you both. That's the difference. The food arrived. We both looked at our plates. Craig spoke quietly. Maybe if you'd been less standoffish, you'd have been included more. Maybe if you'd made more effort. I made effort for 3 years, son. I showed up when invited, brought gifts, tried to connect. Sloan made it clear I wasn't welcome unless she needed something from me. She didn't know you then. Now she does. People change, Dad. They grow. Do they? Or do they just recalibrate their approach when they realize someone's useful? Craig set down his sandwich. I don't want to do this. Sloan is my wife, my partner. If you can't respect that, if you can't be happy that we're trying to include you, I'm happy to be included for who I am, Craig, not for what I have. We ate in silence, heavy, painful silence that felt like the distance between us made physical. When the check came, I paid it. We walked to our cars separately. He didn't hug me goodbye, just nodded, got in his car, drove away. I stood in that parking lot where he'd thrown up pancakes at 12, where we'd laughed about it, where everything had been simple and clear, and I understood. My son was lost to me, not forever maybe, but for now. That understanding hurt worse than anything Sloan had ever said. I realized that sometimes protecting your peace means putting 400 miles between yourself and people who only love your wallet. I signed the will in Margaret's office 2 weeks later, early December. 2 witnesses, both paralegals I'd never met. They watched me sign, signed themselves, notarized the documents. Done. Margaret filed everything securely, gave me copies in a sealed envelope. This is effective immediately, Malcolm. If anything happens, your executor has clear instructions. Thank you, Margaret. Take care of yourself. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I started researching. Retirement communities, smaller cities, places where nobody knew me, where I could start fresh without pretense or expectation. Asheville, North Carolina kept appearing. Mountain town, arts community, reasonable cost of living, 400 miles from Columbus. Far enough for peace, close enough if Craig ever came to his senses. Over the next month, I made 3 trips down, looked at condos, found one that felt right. 2 bedrooms, balcony overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, part of a community with a pool and fitness center. $285,000. I paid cash, still left me $1.8 million in investments, plus the rental income. More than enough. In early January, I called Craig, told him I was moving. Time for a change of scenery. New chapter. He was surprised. Why Asheville? Why not? When? February. A pause. That's fast. I've been thinking about it a while. I heard Sloane's voice in the background, urgent. Craig's hand over the phone, muffled conversation. Then back. Okay. Well, good luck, I guess. Thanks, son. When I hung up, I imagined Sloane's face, the realization that her access was ending, that 400 miles of mountain roads stood between her and my bank accounts. I packed methodically, hired movers, listed my Columbus house with a realtor. It sold in 3 weeks for $218,000. Forwarded my mail, set my phone to send Craig's calls to voicemail. I'd check them, respond if necessary, but on my schedule. February 15th, I locked the door on that house for the last time, drove south, didn't look back. Sometimes freedom looks like running away, but really, it's running toward yourself. Standing on my balcony watching the sunrise over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I realized this is what all those years of sacrifice were actually for: freedom. The condo faced east. Every morning, I'd wake around 6, make coffee in a machine that actually worked properly. I'd bought a new one, a Breville that made coffee the way coffee should taste. I'd take my cup out to the balcony and watch the mountains emerge from darkness, layers of ridgelines going from black to blue to green as the sun rose. Nobody to explain myself to, nobody judging my choices, nobody calculating what they could extract from me, just peace. I furnished the place thoughtfully, not expensively, but intentionally. A comfortable couch, a good reading chair, a proper dining table where I could eat meals like they mattered. I hung photos of Eleanor, of Craig as a boy, of my parents, my life, my terms. I bought a new car, nothing flashy, a 3-year-old Honda CR-V, but new to me, reliable, comfortable. No more explaining why I drove something with a dent in the door. Within a month, I'd found a hiking group, seniors mostly, 60s and 70s, meeting twice a week for moderate trails. We'd hike 3 miles, stop for lunch at whatever small-town diner was nearby, swap stories. Nobody asked what I'd done for a living. Nobody cared. We were just people enjoying the mountains. I started volunteering at the Asheville Public Library. They had a financial literacy program, teaching young families about budgeting, saving, investing. I'd meet with couples in their 20s and 30s, walk them through the same principles that had built my wealth. Start small, be consistent, ignore the noise, let time work. Some of them listened, some didn't. That was fine. I was planting seeds, same as that library book had planted a seed in me back in 1978. I traveled. Boston in April, Seattle in June, Maine in October, all places Eleanor had wanted to visit, places we'd planned to see someday had become now. I'd walk through cities thinking about what she would have noticed, what would have made her laugh, what photos she would have taken. She was gone, but I carried her with me. I ate at nice restaurants sometimes, not often. I'd never be someone who needed fancy meals, but occasionally I'd try the local place everyone talked about, order the chef's special, tip well. I donated. Local food bank, regional literacy programs, the Mountain Rescue Volunteer Organization. Not huge amounts, but regular, meaningful contributions. My investment portfolio kept growing. Peterson managed it remotely. Quarterly calls to review allocations. By my 69th birthday, it had crossed 2.5 million. I didn't think about it much. It was there, working, doing what compound interest does. But it wasn't who I was. A man standing on a balcony in the mountains, drinking good coffee, watching the sunrise, feeling genuinely content for the first time in years. All those decades of discipline, of sacrifice, of clipping coupons and driving dented cars. This was the payoff, not the money itself, the freedom it created. Every time Craig called, I hoped this would be the conversation where he finally saw through her. But I'd learned you can't wake someone who's pretending to sleep. He'd call every few months, usually evenings. The conversations followed a pattern. Hey Dad, how's Asheville? Good. Beautiful weather. Mountains or something. That's great. Work's busy. End of semester coming up. How are your students? Good. Challenging year, but good. Surface level. Safe. Like we were acquaintances catching up, not father and son with 42 years of history between us. I'd hear Sloane in the background sometimes. Not words, just her voice, present, monitoring. Once, about 6 months after I'd moved, Craig mentioned they hadn't bought the bigger house. Financing fell through. Market's tough right now. I didn't offer help, didn't ask for details, just said, "That's too bad." Silence on the line. "Yeah," he said finally. "Well, we'll figure it out." Another call, maybe 8 months in. He sounded strained, tired. "How's retirement treating you?" he asked. "Can't complain, staying active. How about you? You sound exhausted." "Just financial stress, you know. Teaching salary doesn't go as far as it used to." Then quickly, "But we're fine. Managing." I wanted to ask questions, wanted to dig into what financial stress meant, whether Sloane was still chasing startup investments, whether they were living beyond their means. But Craig deflected every gentle probe. "We're fine, Dad. Really." I sent birthday cards. His birthday in March with a $50 check. Not a fortune, not an insult. Just something impersonal, but thoughtful. I never got thank you calls for those. But the checks cleared, so I knew he received them. I wanted to tell him about the hiking group, about the literacy program, about the couples I was helping learn to invest. I wanted to share my life, but our conversations never deepened enough for that kind of sharing. So I'd talk about weather, mountains, the occasional restaurant I'd tried, and I'd get off the phone feeling hollow. But I'd learned something over 69 years. You can't force people to see what they're not ready to see. You can't make someone question their reality when they're comfortable in their illusion. Craig would figure it out eventually, or he wouldn't. Either way, I couldn't control it. I could only live my life well and leave the door cracked open. The rest was up to him. My will is signed, witnessed, and filed, and every dollar I saved represents a choice. Help people who need it, or fund someone who only wanted it. I'm sitting in my Asheville living room right now, 70 years old, telling you this story. 2 years have passed since that Sunday dinner, since Sloane called me a burden, since everything changed. The documents Margaret prepared are filed securely. My intentions are clear, legally binding, and final, unless I choose to change them. St. Jude's Children's Hospital, $900,000. That money will fund research, treatment, family support, kids who are fighting for their lives while their parents fight to pay bills. My nephew didn't make it, but maybe this helps someone else's nephew survive. Columbus Literacy Council, $600,000. Eleanor's passion, her legacy, adults learning to read, getting their GED, opening doors they thought were closed forever. She'd be proud of that. Ohio State Postal Workers Scholarship Fund, $500,000 for kids whose parents sort mail, deliver packages, work jobs people think are simple but require dedication and dignity. Help them get education, opportunity, choices their parents might not have been able to provide. Habitat for Humanity, the rental property, a house that's provided income and security for me, now building homes for families who need them. Craig, $10,000 and a letter. I update that letter every year on his birthday. Tell him I love him. Explain my reasoning. Express hope that someday he'll understand that this wasn't about punishing him, but about honoring the values that built the wealth in the first place. Discipline, integrity, respect, purpose beyond self. Nothing for Sloane. Not a dollar. Not out of spite. I don't hate her. I pity her. But I won't reward the behavior she showed me. My portfolio's at $2.6 million now. Peterson and I review it quarterly. The growth continues. Compound interest doesn't care about family drama. It just works, quiet and reliable, the way it always has. Sloane still calls Craig. I've learned through the rare updates he shares. She asks if I've mentioned anything about my plans, if I've talked about updating my will, if there's been any indication of what she might expect. Craig deflects. He doesn't know the specifics, but he's uncomfortable with her questions. I can hear it in his voice when he mentions them. That discomfort gives me hope. Small hope, but hope. Someday, maybe at the will reading, maybe sooner if Craig finds his courage, he'll understand what I've done. He'll see that the mailman in the thrift store cardigan was teaching a lesson all along. Your life's work should reflect your values. Your legacy should help people who need help, not enable people who want without deserving. 45 years of discipline created this wealth. 45 years of choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, and it will create meaning long after I'm gone. That's what matters. If you're watching this and someone in your life only sees your wallet, not your worth, remember, you get to decide who benefits from your life's work, and dignity is never negotiable. I'm 70 years old now, healthy, content, sitting in my Asheville condo with mountain views and genuine peace. 2 years ago, I sat at a different table in a different city, listening to my daughter-in-law call me a burden. That moment changed everything, but not the way she intended. Here's what I learned, and what I want you to understand. Respect isn't negotiable. You don't owe anyone tolerance for disrespect just because they're family. Blood relation doesn't purchase the right to treat you like you're less than human. Your legacy is the only thing that outlives your heartbeat. Make it count. Make it reflect who you actually are, what you actually believe, not what someone else wants from you. Wealth isn't about the number in your account. It's about the choices that number enables and the values it reflects. My 2.6 million represents 45 years of saying no to immediate gratification. Every dollar has a story of discipline behind it. Some people will only ever see you as useful or useless based on what you can provide. Those aren't your people. It took me 68 years to fully accept that truth, but I accept it now. I don't hate Sloan. I pity her. She'll spend her whole life chasing things that don't actually matter. Bigger houses, better cars, status that's always one purchase away. She'll never understand what real security feels like because she thinks it comes from external things. Real security comes from character, from discipline, from relationships built on something more than transactions. Whether you've got 2 million saved or 20,000, the principle is the same. You decide what your life's work means. You decide who benefits from your sacrifice. You decide what dignity costs, and whether you're willing to sell it. If you're dealing with disrespect from family, remember this. You don't owe anyone access to your peace or your resources just because you share DNA. Set boundaries. Protect yourself. Live well. Every morning I wake up here, I think about Eleanor, about those early years clipping coupons and investing that first $50, about every market crash I didn't panic through, about every luxury I didn't buy so the money could compound. It was all worth it, not because of the money itself, but because I proved to myself that discipline wins, patience wins, values win. Go ahead and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Share your own story if you've dealt with something similar. And if this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for listening to an old mailman's story about respect, dignity, and knowing your worth.